Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm Zelp and today we are playing some Warframe. We're gonna get to the bottom of who is the actual king now, corrosive or viral. Now there are always the practical way of finding solutions, which I find really interesting because for me I've never really did any conclusions based on how I feel. So a lot of people, especially in Warframe, that I realized long before when I even started making like mathematical proof or ideas that it's correct on paper. People have been already coming up with builds that is pretty much the optimum, even though after proving it with the maths that they are right. And they didn't even go through the maths. They like did it based on how they feel. You know, you shoot like this and it feels like, oh, the enemy got killed faster. And back then there wasn't even like the simulacrum to be testing. But over here where I'm really insecure and I don't really trust my feelings, we're gonna prove rather if corrosive is king or viral is king based on maths. Now I've been thinking about this for pretty much most of today on how to do it. And I actually thought that I would want to take a weapon, something like what I did yesterday, and attack an enemy and see the values and then compare the values. But then I thought of a better solution, something that I can do on paper that does not require so much repetitive actions and like screen freezing in order to get the values and things like that. I'm gonna theorize, create a scenario and see how viral is going to perform and also how corrosive is going to perform at their maximum stack. Believe it or not, I'm actually really proud of this idea. Like I sat down for about 30 minutes after watching the latest dev stream because someone told me that they actually came out with a graph as well that they showcased. I wanted to see how far was I off with their graph, and turns out it's actually pretty close. Anyways, I come up with this solution and I want to share it with you. If you are not mathematically inclined, you might not get what I'm trying to do, but I'll try my best to explain it as simple as possible, step by step, so that hopefully even if you don't know a lot of maths, you'll still see the full picture of what I'm trying to do. And those who are very mathematically inclined, you can also use this opportunity to check my maths and see if it's correct. Okay, so very quickly, let's just go through what are the changes with the stats, because especially if you're kind of like outdated like I am, you might not know this, so I want to keep you up to date. For corrosive, the first proc is that it removes 26% of the armor, and every subsequent proc is going to remove an extra 6% all the way up to 80%. So you cannot with just corrosive procs to remove 100% of an enemy's armor. It's capped at 80%. And they also added a duration, so it no longer lasts forever like it used to, but instead there is a 8-second lasting period. So I'm guessing if you attack fast enough and continue proccing, you can maintain that 80% armor removed. Now viral, on the other hand, that a lot of people telling me it's king now, gives you a damage buff on health types. So it gives you an extra 100% on the first proc, and then every subsequent proc is going to increase that damage by 25% all the way up to, or at least the way they phrase it is subsequent viral status at 25% for a total of 325% capped. Now I feel like this phrase is very misleading because the first time I read it, it feels like what they're saying is that it's capped at 325%. But if you read through on, it says that now it deals 2 times damage on the first proc and can scale up to 4.5 times. And even if you take 100% plus 325%, that is only 4.25%. So I feel like the cap is actually inclusive of this 25%. So it's actually 25 plus 325. And therefore you get 350. So if you add the 100%, you'll get 4.5%. So I think it's 4.5%. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, but even if I am wrong, it's just the extra 25%. So basically for our calculation, we are going to use this 4.5 times. I don't have time to actually check it in game. I might do it in a later version of a video for Warframe where I check other stuff as well. But currently we're just going to take that 4.5 times, which is an extra 350%. Okay, now this is sort of like the hard part. This is where I try to explain what I'm doing over here and how this will actually determine or help us figure out which is better. Is viral better or corrosive is better? Or in what case would corrosive outplay viral? Okay, so first we need our dummy. We need something that has armor and has health. And also we need our damage. So we need a certain amount of damage that we'll be doing to him. So I've already created a scenario where the armor will keep increasing by 50. So it starts off with an enemy that has 10,000 health and has 50 armor. And then another scenario is the armor increased by 50 and then it still has the same amount of health, and then so on and so forth. So we have multiple different enemies with multiple different armor rating, and the damage that we're dealing, considering it as we are using the same weapon, so it has the same damage, which is in this case 100 damage, and the health pool is the same. Only the armor changes, and we're gonna see how that would actually translate. Now with the armor change, you will actually get different damage reduction. The formula of damage reduction is mentioned in the last video. So it's the same. You take the armor, divide by the armor plus 300, and then you have the damage reduced. So at 50 armor, it actually reduces the total amount of damage by 14%, 14.3%. So if I were to calculate how many number of hits do I need to deal to this enemy that has 50 armor and 10,000 health when I'm only doing 100 damage, I will need a total of 116.6, I guess 117 hits to kill it. Now, considering that if we're using the same weapon, and therefore our attack speed is probably the same, I feel like the number of hits is just as good as calculating the time taken to kill the enemy, because the number of hits will actually translate to time if you're using the same weapon, if you're using the same type of hit. Because testing in Warframe is simulacrum with different weapons, there's always things like the stance that pulls off different timing that may give you extra or even decrease your damage, like what you see in the last video. So it's very inconsistent and it's very hard to prove certain theories. Whereas over here, we can actually create a scenario that actually help with that. So from here, you can see the number of hits that it will take on normal occasions. That means without any viral proc or corrosive proc. Okay, and you can see that because you essentially deal about 85.7% of your damage. So this one actually becomes roughly about 85.7. Therefore, if you do a calculation real quick, like 10,000 divide by the damage that you deal that is been reduced due to the armor, which is just now we said is 85.7, then you'll get about 116 or 117 hits. So as you can see, as the armor increases, the number of hits also increases. That means you need more hits or you need more time to kill a specific enemy. Now for those that wants to see the maths that's being used in the formula over here, you can see that the damage you deal is going to be equals to the damage that you originally do from the weapon, which is 100, times 1 minus the reduction. So in other words, if you reduce, let's say 20% of your damage, then your damage should times 80% because it's only doing 80% of the damage. So that's why you have the 1 minus the 20%. So the number of hits that you need is really just the health divided by the damage that you deal, and then you get the number of hits. Okay, now let's take a look at one that's a little bit more confusing. It's the viral. So how do we calculate when you have a max stat of viral? So we learned just now that viral will actually give you 4.5 times the damage, okay, which is an increase of 350% of your damage. So what I did was really easily, I take my damage, the damage that I deal, okay, after I reduce due to armor, that value is increased by 4.5. So basically this is the damage that you deal, which is after reduction. And what I did was I take the damage that I deal after reduction and I multiply it by 4.5. So I'm actually doing more damage at max stack of viral. And then all I need to know when I want to know how many hits I do is again just take the health divided by the max viral stat damage. So in this case is the damage that I deal just now with after reduction, and then I times it by 4.5. I hope that is simple enough. So you can see basically the number of hits required is less by 4.5 times of this one. So in other words, this is the original time that I need to do. If I take this value and I just divide it by 4.5, Jesus, I forgot to put divide in, I will actually get this value, which is now the number of hits that I require with a max stat viral. In other words, just by having max stack viral, you are essentially reducing the time taken to kill something by 4.5 times. Okay, now it gets really confusing. It's the corrosive part. So corrosive actually reduces the armor. So we have to go all the way to square one to find out what's the armor, reduce the armor to find a new damage reduction, and then do that whole thing again. Okay, so over here you can actually see a sort of like short note. Damage reduction is actually equals to armor. I think I'm gonna click over here. So damage reduction is equals to armor divided by armor plus 300. So therefore the new damage reduction when you have max corrosive, it's going to be armor times 0.2. Now this 0.2 is basically 20%, because with a max stack corrosive you can remove the enemy's armor by 80%. So what's left is 20%. That's why I times 20%. And then the other armor has also reduced all the way to only left 20% plus 300. So then we have a new damage reduction that is not as bad as the current one. And then I basically just use that value and then find the number of hits. Okay, so instead of damage times 1 minus reduction, we now take damage times 1 minus reduction after corrosive. And then finally you take the health divided by the corrosive, max corrosive stat damage. And then we get these values. Now right off the bat you can see that when the armor is low, the amount of hits required for a weapon with the same amount of damage with an enemy with the same amount of health is way lesser. In fact, if you were to compare, this is about 4 times lesser. So viral is definitely king against something that has really low armor. Again, this is because we are comparing in the sense that we're testing it on Grineers, so they don't have shields. When they have shields, viral actually don't have that buff on shields, if I'm not mistaken. So I haven't tested it in game yet, but this is what I gathered from reading the patch notes. Okay, anyway, enemy with armor 50 and 10k health, and you dealing 100 damage, you will need about 26 hits to kill it with a max stack viral. Whereas if you have a max stack corrosive, you need 103 hits to kill it. And you can see this going down, but you'll also realize something pretty interesting is that as you're going down the list, as the armor value slowly increases, corrosive is actually very slowly catching up. Like if you were to look over, let me find something a little bit more obvious. Let's say this one. This is in the 80s and this is at the 160s, which is almost half. So before is like 4 times more. You have to hit 4 times more before the corrosive actually is equal. But now it's almost double, right? It's only double. And then if you keep going on and on and on, at some point it reaches a point where it's really close, and it stays really close for a really long time. And this is kind of the problem, because in order for corrosive to surpass viral, you will need the enemy to have at least 10.5k armor. This armor rating is actually going to be a value that's going to be really hard to achieve, especially with the current tweak that they have, making the armor scaling like an S shape, like we mentioned in the last video. Now, if I want to give you some perspective of how that is going to be like, now this is may not be 100% accurate, but if a Lancer at level 5 has 105 armor and at level 155 has 1950 armor, like the example we showcased in the last video, then just by playing with the ratio, again, it may or may not actually work, but in theory, if the curve is the same, it should work. A level 5 heavy gunner with 500 armor might have about 9.2 or 9.3k armor at level 155. So in other words, you need to face a Grineer, a heavy Grineer, way higher than level 155 in order for corrosive to be more superior than viral. And the truth of the matter is that currently, with the current state of the content, we really don't quite need to face any enemies that is that high of a level. So in that sense, a one-on-one face-off between a viral proc and also a corrosive proc, viral is indeed more superior. But there is a but. We are not considering a lot of other factors, like how would corrosive projection take into play, which is something that I haven't tested. Can you actually reach 100% with the help of corrosive projection? We also have not tested them with other status. So yes, there are still a lot of factors that we have not explored. But let me know down in the comments what you think of this version of a one-on-one fight between viral and corrosive in this sense. And if it makes sense to you, if it doesn't make sense to you, or what you think I need to improve on. Because in my honest opinion, I feel like this is probably the best or a really great way to compare between viral and corrosive. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.